All right. Welcome, everybody. We're live today, and this is a little different than what we normally do. So we have some new faces, and we're actually very excited about this live. Both Thomas and I, part of a team of people who've organized the course, and we were saying we never get the chance to afterwards actually sit down, and we've been, I think, 2 months out now, talk to the participants and say, how are you? How has this transformed you? What has happened? So for us, a great opportunity also to have a mini reunion and catch up with these wonderful people that I'll introduce you to in a minute. So the purpose of today is really to talk about like how we practice our facilitation, how it shows up, and how learning journeys within our practice also can transform us and help us. Connected, of course, to our course, Leadership Through Facilitation, that again, both Thomas and I are part of the faculty. So welcome, Theo, Molly, Marissa, today. I'm just going to ask you, each of you, to just introduce yourself. Where are your feet touching the ground? And share with us, how does facilitation show up for you in your life?
Theo, you want to go first?
All right, I'll go first. And actually, Fleur, I love that thing you just said with where your feet touch the ground. I started actually after the course to use it all the time, and people love it. It's such a nice sort of, it's like, where you're from. It's like, where do your feet touch the ground? Yes, so I'm Theo Negra. I'm a customer success manager for Mural visual collaboration platform, and my feet touch the ground right now in a random parking lot in Portugal. I'm in a camper van. Great icebreaker, I guess. Like, where are you? On a plane, we were saying before. Yeah, and hi, Misha, as well. And the last bit of the question was, yeah, how facilitation kind of shows up,
Shows up
right?
in your life, yes.
Yeah, yeah, I guess it's yeah, mainly kind of work context, running a bunch of sessions with customers, both kind of more training side of things, but then also facilitation of workshops and things like that. But quite frankly, and I'm sure we're gonna get into that in a bit, it once you do this experience and you start to like sort of talk with people from different angles to facilitation, you're gonna start to see it everywhere within sort of your life. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, kind of thing. So yeah, that's me.
Great, welcome, thank you. And welcome, Misha. I just put the questions in our private chat so you can follow along. Who's next?
I'll go next. I'm Molly, and my feet are touching the ground in the U.S., in New Jersey, in the Northeast. So the work that I do is I'm a management consultant for nonprofits, mostly in the area of strategy and organizational development. And so facilitation has been a part of my work for 25 years, but I never took a course in how to do it before this year. And it just blew my mind. I mean, it was one of those things where I now know enough to know how much I don't know. But it's, just learning all these techniques that I was like, it really helped me have a new perspective on how I can come into these meetings and manage my own energy as the facilitator and manage the group conversation better. And I haven't yet had a chance to put it into use yet, because we just stopped the course about, I don't know, 2 months ago. But I'm looking forward to it. And I'll pass it to Marissa.
I'm Marissa. My feet touch the ground in the Bronx, New York, in the U.S. And I have to echo what Theo and Molly said. Facilitation is showing up in surprising ways, not even at work, just in life, in the world, in regular conversations with regular people. I'm also a management consultant. I work with Molly. We work with nonprofits, and I haven't fully used, the course work to sort of lay out a facilitation project from beginning to end yet. But there have definitely been bits and pieces, little gems that have shown up different places. And I'll pass it to Misha.
Oh, Misha, unmute. You just have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I think it was my husband vacuuming in the background that was making all the noise.
Oh, okay. That's okay. Thanks.
My feet are on the ground in Villefranche-de-Rouergue in France, which is an hour and 40 minutes north of Toulouse in the Aveyron, where I live with my husband and my 3 dogs and cat. And I am a senior event designer and facilitator, and I mostly work for an agency called Vantage Global at the moment, and I help clients to design agendas and as well as the spaces in which they have their meetings. So that includes stage design and seating arrangements and workshops and pretty much the whole thing. I unfortunately don't get to facilitate the sessions as often as I would like. I am now creating a new business unit for this agency that I just joined on agenda design, which will be very much, I think, influenced by the course that I took with you guys, and also which the agency paid for as a kind of an open invitation for me starting, which I thought was brilliant. And so a lot of this idea of also the converging, diverging, which I knew about, but had kind of gone in the background, or this kind of loop, these looping things. And Thomas, your ideas about, thinking about what am I curious about, or I'd be curious to know more about rather than asking questions. And a lot of the things that I learned as well from you, Flora, and from everybody really is going into the kind of a product that I'm trying to design to offer clients a better way to organize events where there's more interaction. I calculated it out. This sounds really weird, and then I'll be quiet. But if you take 200 leaders and you put them in a room for 30 hours, that's I hope I'm doing the math right. That's 60,000. Is it 60,000? 200 times. That's 6,000 hours of mind power that you are investing. And yet so few people want to spend the time to actually think about what are we doing with those people for 2 days. And so it's really something that's really occupying my mind, that the time we spend designing and how we facilitate is such an investment. If you think about the actual time investment people are making when they bring 200 leaders together for 2 days. I mean, imagine if you actually used all of those hours of mind power, what you could actually transform in those meetings.
That's such a great way to look at it. Thank you. And thank you all for introducing yourself. Just a quick call out also to everybody watching. Where are your feet touching the ground? Put it in the comments. And also, if you have any questions for our wonderful group today, just pop them in the chat and then we'll make sure that they get here into the room. Thomas, how about you? Some thoughts?
Yeah, I'm trying desperately for my feet not to touch the ground because it's still cold here, and we switched off the heating. No, I mean, first of all, also great to see you again, because it's been a bit of a break since we had the last session, and also listening to you is just, on the one hand, it's just the way you showed up also during the course came so nicely through now for your little introductions, but also then again seeing what you've done since. But I want to actually take us a little bit back, because we have had the privilege to see your journey and follow it a little bit through those times and the weeks that we worked together. But let's go a bit back to the beginning, because one thing that we were always curious about is what made you sign up. I mean, the course is called Leadership Through Facilitation, and often there's a lot of leaders or facilitators that shy away from either concept, which is exactly why we combined it, because we think it's so important to not look upon these separately. But what kind of made you say, okay, this is something that I want to try, and what made you then in the end take that step? Yeah, Misha.
I think that facilitation should be one of the core competencies of leadership. I honestly think so. And I feel that it's something that we don't voice. I mean, I think it's assumed when people talk about leadership that leaders can communicate, but leaders are not only paid to communicate, leaders are paid and put in position to orchestrate connected voices, to orchestrate that. And that's a facilitation task. And that job is really a leadership skill. And that's why I was so interested with the connection between those two topics.
Thank you. Yeah, Marissa, please.
I absolutely agree with Misha. I think that now. I did not think that before. I saw like leadership through facilitation. I was like, that's weird. But okay, let's try it. But now I absolutely see how those two ideas go together. And like each one makes the other one better.
Yeah, please, Molly.
Yeah, I think I was attracted by the word facilitation more than the word leadership at first. I really wanted to deepen my facilitation practice at this point in my career. But very quickly, I realized that there's in our sector, in the nonprofit sector in the US, there's a lot of conversation around sharing power and the distribution of power. And power is really decision making. And so that idea of facilitative leadership, that leaders become facilitative rather than directive leaders, right? In a situation where you're trying to distribute power more equitably in the organization, and that really unlocks transformation at a much deeper level. So I very quickly got excited by that combination of leadership through facilitation.
Yeah, and I'll answer that with my kind of nerd hat on by saying, well, you give me like a good course, of course I'll join. Obviously, there's not much like kind of selling really needed there, but no, I think in terms of that, I think first of all I had kind of like heard about the community a little bit, and two of my colleagues are part of it, Al and Farah, and so I heard like really nice things. And if I'm to think actually of one of the first kind of activities that we did in the course, which was around like why are you joining, but then why are you really joining, but then why are you really joining? I guess at kind of like further down in that why chain, there's probably something around, for me, sort of developing certain skills, or even maybe finding something, some kind of like a signature or core essence or something in there that is very authentic and is very sort of true to who I am, that manifests itself in the sphere of both facilitation and leadership. And I think I was maybe originally a little bit intimidated by those two words put together, and then more curious by how those two words were put together. Really happy that I went with a curiosity part.
Yeah, no, we too. And I think what you all pointed out is that because we've also, of course, in preparation, but also long before we talked about this course, we've shared our ideas. So the six of us who kind of were involved in this first round, and like how we see it. And there's of course different elements to it, right? One is the technical element about like how to engage and how to design and all those things, but then there's a lot of self-reflection, there's a lot of group dynamics that are also involved in this, which for us also linked a lot to the topic of leadership. And just because you mentioned it, Theo, for those listening who don't know the community or know about the community, the whole course is from an academy, which is by the NeverDoneBefore community, a community where we also, as the name already say, try to push the boundaries a bit, try to explore connections, try to explore things from different angles, and play a little bit to not stand still around things that we're doing and how we facilitate. But what about you, Flor? Why are leadership and facilitation why does this belong together?
Yeah, we reflected so much about this, and this is something maybe our participants don't know, that we basically went through all the same exercises that you did before when we were designing it. So a lot of that self-reflection, how we were going to show up, and I just really relate to most of all the things you're saying about how this is becoming and should become one of the core competencies of leadership, to be more inclusive, to ask the questions instead of give the answers. And it's also something that that's for me the other side of it. We also see facilitators not feeling empowered enough to take leadership roles. We've talked about that a lot, I think, in the course as well. So there's that flip side, leaders who need to be more facilitative, but also facilitators who need to be more leaders in their processes by owning certain parts of process design, of guiding processes. So I think the other flip side of that is that we really hoped with the course also to empower facilitators to say, no, this part I know, and this part I will bring to the table. So I think that was another really good side of it. I'm curious to know from all of you. So some of you already shared, since you've done the course, it's sort of facilitation has been showing up everywhere. How has this process, this experience impacted your overall journey as a facilitator and professionally or personally even? Mish?
Yeah, it's very interesting because there's a couple of things. Somebody commented in the chat, the focus area is multi-stakeholder learning, often with polar views. And one of the things I really appreciated about the course was that you team taught it, that there was a lot of different views, a lot of different approaches to leadership and facilitation. And so it really underlined the importance of that multi-focus approach to anything. And a topic that kept coming up was the concept of co-facilitation. And what happens a lot where in my field of work is people are asked to facilitate meetings who are not facilitators. They're people who are actually employees of the company. And then they do it together and they confuse facilitation with moderation. And then if I say, well, if they're co-facilitating, they need to really talk to each other, and they'll say, oh, but only one person is on stage at one time. And I'm like, yes, but that's a great opportunity for the second person to be listening to conversations that are happening, to be supporting that person off stage. And that's what I learned as well in this course, is it's not just the person who's in the front delivering content or facilitating at that moment. There's the other facilitators who are also playing a supportive role, and how important that dialogue is. So that was a really big key learning for me, and that I've been communicating to my clients since the course.
If anybody else wants to jump in.
Maybe I'll say something that came to mind now with that question is, I think for me, one of the biggest impacts were not only after the course, after we kind of had gone through the whole journey, but also throughout it. I think there's something so powerful in witnessing and just being kind of regularly exposed to just different ways of facilitating and different styles, and all being super, personally finding it super, super inspiring. And I think that for me had a big impact in just witnessing that, and kind of even with almost without being aware, kind of taking little bits and pieces and implementing them in these little moments of facilitation. I think probably I had some like workshops and things throughout the course, but it was really interesting for me to see how you might even take little bits and pieces and put them into contexts that are not even kind of big important facilitation moments, but just sort of a regular interactions with groups or even one person. So I think there's something there about kind of making that implicit explicit somehow, and being surrounded by all of that inspiration that can make such a big impact.
Yeah, I think I want to build on that. Just in some ways, to me, there were 6 of you teaching the course, and each of you had your own style and personality as a facilitator that very very closely matched the content that you were teaching us. And so for me, it becomes easier in a way, because sometimes when you learn a lot of content, you come out of a course and you're like, oh my God, there's so much swimming around in there. How do I even begin to unpack this and put it to use? But I find myself going, I'm going to channel Thomas now. I'm going to channel Flora.
That's so interesting.
Or I'm going to be Kate and be really playful, and, or Shamir and be really gentle and directive. And, so it's like, part of it is your energy, but part of it is just getting to know you as facilitators. That was such a great model for me as a vocabulary. I feel like my vocabulary has expanded. So.
Wow.
Marissa?
Yeah, I think what I wanted when I signed up, what I wanted was like a handbook. I wanted to leave with like a handbook. Like, here's how to do facilitation. Like, here's how to learn Portuguese. Here's how to make an apple pie. Here's how to like do this thing. But we did get, many tools, but more importantly, to Molly's point, to everyone's point, really, because you were a group, and you were all so different. It's more about, it's less about the task at hand and more about me as the person doing it. How am I approaching it? What is my mindset? How am I feeling? Why am I doing this? Why am I asking that question? And it's a lot of that, which I didn't expect. But it's extremely important, especially if we're talking about facilitation, but we're also talking about leadership, right? So you have to know, what is your motivation for even doing any of this? So that was extremely helpful. And that's, again, why I think it's sort of showing up in all of these different areas. So it's not just, I'm leading this workshop and I'm using these tools and I'm taking this approach. It's one of the participants, I can see her face. I can't remember her name. In one of the earlier sessions was like the root of the word facilitation is just where you're supposed to be making it easier. You're making something easier for the people who are participating. And so all of that social, emotional, mental work, intellectual work, was really the best, was really what I took away from it, not what I intended to take away from it.
Sorry, Misha.
No, jump in, go ahead.
No, I got prompted by something you said there, because I think one of the things that I was talking with Kate about this at some point after the course is, I think where the strength of this experience really stood out for me was in, maybe not that much in the kind of opportunity to practice side of things, because that is kind of present in sort of your day-to-day work. You have those opportunities more or less. The big shift for me was in terms of like really like a facilitation mindset kind of thing. And I think that was absolutely due to both the really deep experiences that we were creating. And so there was this really nice opportunity to experience things as participants in doing some really courageous facilitation work, I would say. And I think that really shifted something more than maybe an opportunity to go in there and practice some tools, let's say, would have done. So to that work of like that deep kind of thinking about what is being done, thinking about how what effect certain things have, what effect does it have when you ask a question versus when you leave things open, like Thomas, you were mentioning. Like, there's so many small things that can generate that kind of, I was calling them like light bulb moments in the course as well. There were so many, both from the faculty, and also just from the discussions that I think we were all having, and it was so deep and rich. And like personally, I've not experienced such a nice kind of deep group environment of reflection and thinking through it. So the point here being, I think sometimes with a lot of kind of learning experiences, we tend to put a lot of focus on, but we have to have this place to practice, and practice is how you learn. And I would almost, having gone through this experience, I would almost like challenge that and say, well, I think mind shift, a big mind shift can also be how you learn in almost in a very subtle way, but one that has a lot of a big impact. Yeah. And I see courageous facilitation work, but maybe I'll leave someone else also mention that.
No, we can definitely get back to that. I'll remember that in the chat. Mish, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of want to build on that. Two things. One, I think that's really interesting, because as facilitators, we're often asking people to do courageous work, right? We're asking them to be vulnerable. We're asking them to share ideas. We're asking them to try different formats that are maybe a little bit outside of their comfort zone. And I thought this course was a great opportunity to get out of my comfort zone and be asked to do some of the same activities that I ask people to do, and just accept that they're going to do them, and realize, wow, it takes sometimes a lot of courage to actually trust in the process. So I think it was done in a way that this learning group, but also the facilitators, but also the learning group, it was a very safe space to actually do that. So it took the fear away, and created a safe space. And I think that builds on what I wanted to say originally was, Marissa, you brought up this idea of the apple pie, and everyone knows I love metaphors, and the whole thing is, to me, that's what facilitation is all about, right? There's not just one way to make apple pie. There's apple pies in different cultures. There's different flours. There's a different process. Some people make a total mess of the kitchen. Some people organize all the ingredients in little bowls, right? So, I mean, it's facilitation is like that. And I think that was the other piece that Theodora brought up is, it's not just these light bulb moments, but it was these metaphors. It was these different structures that we learned, not just the big structures that you taught us, but the little structures that are shared between facilitators of different ways of thinking. Like Theo came up with the idea, we always want the diamonds. What were the diamonds we take away from a course? And sometimes it's important to think about, what are the rocks that if you polish them just a little bit would be a diamond? I mean, I totally took that away from the course. So I learned from the teachers, but I also learned from all the participants to be more courageous. And I think that's a really important point.
I think I can jump on that also, because that's something I wanted to add. The six of us, we kind of led this course and designed this course and everything, but really the content owners beyond some of the tools or some of our ideas that we shared, you were those. And the beauty is, and we're all six of us believe in our uniqueness when we come into facilitation, which was also important to get that, to give that space, and to really have a space for you all to explore and play a little bit with this within the time that we've had together. And the way you all showed up was also equally a learning experience for us. And I think that's kind of that's a little bit also the mindset that our ambition was to show and to showcase, whether this is interesting for any facilitator that takes the course, is that it's also about, learning. Facilitation is just as much about learning as it is about giving, guiding, and other things. And so we learned a lot from you, and we did a couple of debriefs, and really we resort also back to things that you have said throughout the course. So that the rock thing came up that you just mentioned, Nisha, for you, that came up at several times as a really strong metaphor for how to work. And you're not the only one who likes metaphors. Floor is also very much on the front line of that, Kate, and others as well. So, yeah.
What I'm hearing, which is, so I don't know why this word comes in my head, but it's like collateral learning, right? So you sort of design a specific program, but the collateral learning that happens is so big. And one of the things that we've always said from the beginning, and I hear a lot of you mentioning that as well, is this course could never be a self-guided video course. This always needed to be in group. If it was up to me, we would even do an in-person version, like an immersive 5-day in-person version. But I mean, at least together, because again, these reflections, and that's also what I'm hearing a lot from you. There's a lot of this sort of collateral learning, mindset shifts, and that's one thing that I think is such a key takeaway for me, at least when I went on facilitation learning journeys, is that the tools become completely irrelevant if you don't have that mindset. So, and the opposite side of that, once you have that mindset, most tools fall into place, most frameworks fall into place to serve that. So that's also one thing that I'm hearing here, like this mindset shift and this collateral learning that happened. There was a request to go a little bit more into the courageous facilitation work, right? What is the safety needed to do this courageous work? Do you want to tell more about that?
I do, yes, but I will try kind of, because there's also some very specific things, and I do not want to spoil the experience, because for anyone maybe going and ended up having that experience, I think that's sort of part of the learning. But yeah, like I think the first thing that comes to mind is one of the things that really stood up to me. One of the things we did as part of the power module, where there was this kind of exercise where I think it was a really courageous ask of participants and of the facilitators as well, I think, where we were kind of almost rating that power, because I think, right, like in a facilitation context especially, we all portray a certain image and have like a certain presence, I think, and that can be, I think, both a very empowering but also very humbling experience at the same time. And it's ultimately, I think, also very, very vulnerable potentially. It might even be more vulnerable when you're co-facilitating with someone where there's like differences in how you're doing things, and there's a bit this like comparison thing going on or not. And yeah, one of the exercises there was around that. And so I thought it was a very courageous thing, because it was taking something that normally stays, let's say, hidden. Like we would be in a group, and everyone, because we're kind of social creatures, we would sort of establish in our head a little bit of a hierarchy, I guess, or like, this is the powerful person, and this is the slightly less powerful person. So, right, like we're doing those judgments kind of in our heads. And bringing that to an explicit front in a facilitation context was a really interesting experience. Definitely one of those that like, yeah, out of the comfort zone for sure. But I just thought, wow, that's a really courageous thing. And then it made me think, wow, right, like, what if we as facilitators would go into a space and make some of those implicit thing explicit? What would happen? Would we, right, or would our kind of safety net go away? Would the opposite be true? What would happen if we were to do that? So yeah, that's an example, but I'm pretty sure that probably everyone part of the call has other examples there. Yeah, Molly.
Yeah, I want to build on that. We've had so much. I mean, part of I think the value of this course, and Thomas, you were getting at this earlier, was not only the learning of techniques and tools, right, but the self-reflection conversations we had. They were so intense, because it's all about how you show up in the front of a room and what you're bringing to that. And the process can be so deeply impacted by even just the energy you bring. So there was an exercise we did, the DJ exercise, where we had two of us go off into a breakout room, and one would be the facilitator and would start facilitating a particular situation, and the other would say at some point, okay, pause, stop for a second. What if you dial your energy up or down? Let's play with that. And it was mind-blowing to me, because I always, as an introvert, I feel like, and so many facilitators are introverts. I was fascinated to learn that. But as an introvert, I feel like when I'm facilitating, I become quite extroverted. And that's the energy I'm constantly bringing to it. And it's like, no, I can actually dial that up and down. And there may be a role for the sort of more introverted me at times. depending on what I'm doing. And so that was really courageous in the sense that I had never felt so kind of allowed to be myself, but also exposed as myself. Yeah.
Definitely +1, Molly, on what you just said. I think it's really super valuable. And I think the other piece about that is we did some case study stuff where we had to get a case study and how would we respond and what was the real need behind the need. And I love this, pushing very much at the very beginning to understand the scope of work and what is it that the client is actually asking for you to facilitate. And it was very interesting going through the process with someone else and evaluating it and also realizing that actually the situation that was described was not as straightforward as it seemed, and that there was probably other issues that the situation, which I would call the brief, right, is not actually, that the person hadn't actually thought of. Like, is there a lack of motivation in a team because the right person is missing, or because there's resources missing, and that it's really not just about motivating people. It's really about finding out what's the real source of the issue. And I think that's the really courageous part for me about facilitating, is being able to uncover what is it that we're really talking about here? What are the discussions that we really need to be having? And I learned as well that there's a lot of different kinds of ways to uncover what you said, Theo, about what's explicit and implicit in what we're being asked to do. And I think that takes a lot of courage to not just take the brief and respond, but to actually look at the brief as a facilitator and facilitate the brief, not just even before you get to a meeting. I think that takes a lot of courage and leadership.
I was going to say, that's what exactly you filled in the sentence exactly. That's also where that process leadership shows up, right? That you can come in and take ownership. Absolutely. Any thoughts, Thomas? What questions are bubbling up for you?
I mean, there are a lot of questions, but I'm just going to throw ourselves out now. If there's anything you would add to the course, you would do differently, what would it be?
More.
Looks like that was scripted, but
not necessarily like more sessions, but a part 2 would be amazing. Just having gone through that, to come back to it with that much more kind of knowledge and awareness and deepen the practice even further, like maybe a practicum or something where we really get to try it on a little more deeply, and we really unpack each of our facilitation styles more deeply. That would be amazing.
Okay.
Marissa, you said thumbs up, but agreed. Sorry, Theo, go ahead.
I mean, it's not a fully flashed thought. It's something that was crossing my mind a little bit after the course. I was thinking about, and I think you mentioned before. So, if this whole course had a big impact in terms of that mind shift side of things, there probably is a part 2 or something afterwards where you go a bit deeper, not in necessarily reflection and analyzing things, but then really more into, I think, tools and really tangibly, how do you do certain things. And why do I say that? Because throughout this course and also afterwards, I was realizing how there are certain things that we're talking about in facilitation that are almost like taken for granted in how they're being talked about. So for example, how do you debrief icebreaker contributions, even like, you ask a question and then people put some things down, and then how do you really, give everyone space and then very artfully find this balance between building on top of what someone says and then passing it on to the other person. And I think the hidden element there might be around, yeah, what are these kind of really tangible tools and things you can take as a facilitator and bring forward. And of course, a lot of that I think comes from experience and really being in these situations. But there probably is a little bit of like taking a bit the essence of like Thomas and Fleur and your, like facilitation archetypes almost, and kind of using that as not really a step-by-step guide, not at all, because everything is shifting and situations are of course very different. But yeah, I think there might be a potential for a little bit of that more kind of step-by-step tools things. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just
No worries.
old-fashioned raising my hand.
No. Go ahead.
I have three things. I'm doing revisiting desire mapping, which is Daniel Laporta's ideas of identifying your core desired feelings and figuring out, how do I want to feel rather than what I want to do. And the course is interesting because you have to fill out 2 workbooks before you even join the course about really it is what you want to achieve and where you're at and setting your intentions. And I think that I would have benefited from doing a little bit more pre-work about the course so that I wouldn't have started thinking about it when I got there. Because I have to say that some of it I was busy, I hadn't thought, and some of the intentions, of course, came out during the course, which is also a good thing. But in retrospect, I feel like I would have liked to have worked through some of my questions and some of my intentions beforehand. So I think maybe based on what happened in our course, maybe there is some pre reflection work that could happen for the next cohort. Because there is, like someone wrote, it's like pie, you can never have enough, right? There is only a limited amount of time that you can ever do something. I really appreciated very much the situational work, case study work, examples of experiences that all of you had in dealing with complicated situations, in dealing with joyful situations, as much situational experience as possible. I think that's something that we just don't get as facilitators because we're within our own little, maybe we work together like Marissa and Molly, but most of the time if we don't co-facilitate all the time, we're very much alone. So we don't get to hear how somebody dealt with this situation or that situation. So a lot of situational stuff I think would be really helpful. And finally, I'm really looking forward to seeing whatever you guys put together after maybe 2 or 3 of these courses in terms of something to look back on, because I keep revisiting the Miro board, my notes that I took, and realizing there was so much that happened in those 7 weeks that I just couldn't process it all. And I keep going, oh yeah. And I feel like there's really a lot of material to share in some kind of format, whether it's a book, an ebook, or I don't know. But anyway, that's my input.
Something you just said, Misha, made me want to just chime in. There were 3 parts to this course. There was the actual course during the course time. Then there was a week later, we had a Q&A session, which you had to sign up for and pay a little extra for. And then there were also one-on-one coaching sessions with each of the teachers of the course, which also you had to sign up for separately and pay a little extra for. Those, I didn't do the coaching, but I did the Q&A, and that really deepened the experience for me. That was so much added value. And I can imagine where the coaching would have been even more. So having it be those 3 pieces, the course itself, and then the reflection a week later to just ask questions about what we learned and go deeper on it, And then even the coaching one-on-one would be, that's just an amazing recipe. Speaking of apple pies.
We keep on the metaphors. How about you, Marissa? What would you add or change?
I think if there were to be, just building on what was just said, if there were to be a part 2 or a part 2/part 3, perhaps the proportions change so the class session is shorter, but the one-on-one is longer, or the Q&A is longer, because actually, can I just say this about our group? Phenomenal group. So I don't know if that's just luck, or if that is like amazing facilitation on your parts, because in the first, in the very first session, it was like, well, why did you sign up for this? What do you hope to get out of this? Where do you live, right? What do you do for a living? No two people had the same answers, right? Everyone's in different parts of the world. Everyone does something. Everyone facilitates different kinds of things. And yet somehow, like, we were able to come together as a group and like do this thing. So the group work, to me personally, the way I learned, was the most valuable, as for the intro part of the course. But if it were to be longer, or if it were to be in modules, then depending on the focus of the module, maybe it's the individual work, or the sort of practicum that Molly mentioned. That's the meat, and everything else is the potatoes, to take the
We're taking it farther, metaphor, yeah.
Fry that until the wheels fall off, right?
I always put potatoes in my apple pie.
I really appreciate that. Both, of course, the kind of or encouragement for continuing and even going deeper on some of the things that we're doing, but also the new ideas, because some of them go already in line with things that we have pretty much worked on in when it comes to things like documentation and others. But it's always good to get these impulses, and this is kind of the same. So I would ask you a question, because you already throughout the course there was this dialogue between us, I felt, where you really gave your input that shaped also along the course where we took it and where we went with you. So I appreciate those feedback as well, and the ideas to take forward.
Absolutely. No, this is wonderful. And I think one of the again, it was said now a couple of times already, this sort of collateral learning that you get from this group. I think for us as well, from our side, I remember the first session, we were all literally blown away. I remember we have a WhatsApp group with the faculty. We were sending audios like, get ready. This group, like, wow, we were really impressed. So again, is that luck? Is that just an incredible privilege? Is that good framing of what we're trying to do? And I think also for anybody listening who already signed up or who's still deciding to sign up, if you hear also these, like you said, these different profiles, everybody already had a little bit of either an intentional or a sort of unconscious connection with facilitation. So we could start at a high level of discussion. We could bring people along. There was a lot of self-reflection going on. And what I hope, and that's something that I'm hearing a little bit in some of the reflections here as well, that we do give that permission, right, to each other to not follow always the step by step, but to bring your whole self, all your styles, all the adjustments, all the questions, all the reflections continuously in your practice. I think if anything, I would always like to create that safe space where people are permitted to be fully themselves, because that for me is the only way you can be a good leader and a good facilitator. So that's definitely a wonderful part of that. As a question as well, so we have some people who are who already signed up for this next cohort that's going to start next week already. We're very excited, so what would be sort of like if you could now, because you know the whole journey now, you have the sort of the wonderful overview of the whole experience, which of course when you started you didn't, and maybe there was some part that was actually great that you didn't know. But now that you have the whole view of the journey, what would be something you'd say to somebody starting this experience?
So I'm sorry, Theo, go ahead.
So I think the biggest thing here is to pay attention to also how you're really almost like physically experiencing the whole thing, because there's learning both in, I would say, yeah, definitely the course, and then maybe a fourth part to the course, like besides the three you mentioned, Molly, is definitely the kind of what happens within the group and all the connections that form as part of that, and the cross inspiration that happens from that. And I think the biggest thing I would say is to kind of go in it very openly and pay attention also to how you're experiencing things. And it might be positive and sometimes it might be negative, and that's also super interesting, I think. Because it is a space, it's also quite a chunk of time every week, and depending on like which time zones you're joining, you might be a morning person joining in the evening, or you might be an evening person joining in the morning. There's all of these variables, and we're all like humans and experience things in different ways. But I think there's so much learning in just paying attention to what happens inside of you throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say there is so much richness in the content and in the discussion around the content. For us, because of our time zone, the course was, I think it was like, midday to 3 p.m. And it was right in the middle of a workday. And so I found myself sometimes getting a little distracted by either what I brought into the meeting, I was stressed from something before, or I was preparing for something after. So really carving out that time and really giving it to yourself as a gift, I think, is really important. The other thing I would say is maybe build in a journaling practice, after each session, journal a little bit so that when you come to the Q&A, you really have sort of pre-thought about some deeper questions you might have. And that will enrich the Q&A period a week later.
I can go next. I think a really important thing that I learned is that there's really no taboos in terms of what you want to ask or what you want to discuss, and that that the definition of what facilitation is and how it relates to leadership, that it doesn't matter where you come from, that exploring that relationship, or even how facilitation is used, or whether you want to do it better or differently, or just have some new inspiration or make connections. I think there's no right way to show up. I think just showing up and really thinking about what it is that you need during that course will change. I found that over the 7 weeks when I came to different courses, completely independent of whether it was purpose, power, or presence, had nothing to do with it, that how I turned up and what I needed from the course was very different every week. And I found out in the end, when I reflected back on the course, that was okay. And that because there's such a broad cohort, and because it's team taught, that there's so many people to catch you from wherever you are, that you can show up in very different ways. Sometimes you don't have a lot of energy because, like Molly said, you're, back to back on evenings. For me, it was evenings. Sometimes I worked all day. I was exhausted and I was like, oh my God, I have this course. And then I'd leave, I'd be in the course and I couldn't believe 3 hours went by and I had a ton of energy. It doesn't matter how you show up or what your energy is, just show up. And I think then every experience will be different. And for me, it was a completely positive experience. So I wish the next cohort best of luck. And I recommend this course. If it was a Google thing, it would get all my stars.
Oh.
I do have one really foolish, overly specific comment about the course, the 3 hours. I would advocate for more sessions and more breaks in the 3 hour sessions. Or, if the breaks require more sessions, then that's great. But if we can, because we did a lot of work in those 3 hours. So just like some more breaks. That's it.
Such a good point. Yeah, no, and I hear that, right? Like, take care of yourself, take care of the energy you're coming in with, journaling. So that's, definitely something. The request, like, always more content, more together, but at the same time, you do need to process. And I just noticed as well, talking to you all now, 2 months later, the energy is quite different than when we were, say, in module 5. And this is an intense course, right? So for all of you who are watching as well, we do 7 weeks in a row, every week, 3 hour session. That's sort of the main. As it was called here before, the class work. So it's the moment where we bring content, we bring framework theories in 7 different themes, everything from purpose to practice, and talking about people, process, power. We also have play in there, presence, very important. So we play with those different themes every week, very intense. And then we have the Q&A as well. So the rhythm is high. So it's really important to keep that, to keep your energy up, to show up, and definitely take care of yourself. I really appreciate that. I'm going to put the link in the chat. And Thomas, if you have a last reflection and a last question, just let's start rounding up as well too.
No reflection anymore on my end. I have greetings for you, of course, from the other 4. Who we are the lucky ones who had these spots today. So they were quite envious, and they said we have to greet you, and they have a question for you. Specifically, Kate came with a question today, which kind of should also be maybe the closing question, looking at time. And the question is: so fill in the blank at the end of this sentence. The experience of the course was like.
I think I'm going to say, like, going to college or university, the whole experience when you go to college or university, that your classes become discussions among the students rather than just a teacher at the front of the room. And you form these intense bonds with the other students. You become they sort of become these friendships. So that's, yeah.
Thank you.
So I would say it's like when you go to a city that you have never been in, and you take the metro, the subway, and you go from stop to stop, and you're not actually sure if you just randomly get off at a stop and you walk up the stairs and you suddenly somewhere in the city, like a derivé, and suddenly you're overwhelmed by all the stuff that you learned there. And I felt like this course was a little bit like that. It was like taking a subway through the city of facilitation and emerging in all these different places that I'd never really expected to land in.
Wow. can totally relate to that one.
City of facilitation. I love that. They should do like an IKEA carpet, you know, when you move from station to station.
Follow the arrows.
Yeah. I'll say so the image that came to my mind is that this course is a little bit like, you know, being in another century and gathering around the fire and getting kind of everyone coming with their own little food, you know, pack and sharing things and sharing advice and sharing that space. And yeah, I don't know, I guess community is what sort of comes to my mind. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's like if you've ever traveled to a different place than where you live with a group of strangers, which I have more than once. It's sort of like that because you're all sort of going to the same places and sort of participating in the same activities, but you're all different and you're doing it for different reasons and all of that. And I've found that the best trips, like you gel as a group immediately or never, right? So this group was able to gel immediately, and it really and the more I think about it, the more I think that wasn't just luck, that was all of the things that Flora said. So that was sort of it was like that. I'll leave it there.
Wow, thank you. Over to you, Flor, looking at the time.
Yes, thank you all so much for showing up and for sharing your reflections with us and with the rest of the world about this first cohort. This was for us a never done before, which we always hope to create these safe spaces. And I really appreciate all the comments. And I also look forward, I'm now already wrote it down, part 2, part 3. So let's see what comes out of this. And for any of you watching who's interested, the link is in the chat. Never Done Before community is actually open currently for new members as well. So if you also want to dive deep into a big community of facilitators, that's also absolutely available right now. And we hope to see you soon on the next live. Thank you so much.
Thank you.